So managing things locally is all well and good, but it requires that you attend a user's workstation to fix a problem. So if you can use remote management tools, that's going to be helpful and certainly a time saver. There are a number of tools in Windows 10 you can use. Remote Assistance allows you to either offer remote help or receive an invitation for remote help. So if the user's stuck with a problem, they can ask you to help, or you can contact them and say, okay, so I'm going to offer to help you. So when a dialog box pops up on your computer, click yes. So Remote Assistance is a useful tool. It even allows you to take remote control. Remote Desktop is a standard set of protocols and a standard tool that allows you to connect and take complete control of a remote system. Remote Desktop is very useful for administration. I use it all the time to administer servers. Rather than physically visit a server and perform a management task on it, I'll use Remote Desktop to connect to it. Far safer than visiting the physical server. Windows PowerShell as well. If you're a command line tool user, then the ability to Windows PowerShell remote is very helpful. And of course, you can simply use a Microsoft Management Console and point to another computer. Generally, the focus of a Microsoft console is to the local computer, but usually all of them will allow you to connect to the remote computer. So as an administrator, you might be faced with a number of different scenarios. So, for example, your user needs help and advice, and you must help the user perform a specific task in a particular application. So what tool might you use for that? Remote Assistance is probably the appropriate tool, allowing you to guide the user, and they can watch as you guide them through the process. So you must perform a single remote management task on a single computer that requires no user interaction. Remote Desktop would be the choice. Or possibly use a management console and point it to the remote computer. You want to perform the same task on multiple remote computers, Windows PowerShell is probably the way to go. Once you've created your script, you can run it against multiple machines. If you want to do it again and again, then you've written the script. It's available to you as a tool that you can reuse, so it's a sensible and non-interactive way of performing that task. You need to perform a repetitive task on multiple computers and you want to repeat it. Well, again, as I've said, Windows PowerShell. You must view the configuration of a remote computer, but are not yet sure of what the problem is. Remote Desktop allows you to take control of the remote machine and investigate it closely. And you want to perform the same management task using the same management tool on any computer, then the management console is the way to go. Before you can do any of that, you'll need to do one other thing. Check that the Windows Firewall configuration allows for remote management. So you do that by going into Control Panel, choosing Windows Firewall and going to the Allowed Apps. And you can see a list here that determines whether or not remote management is allowed. You just select the appropriate remote management apps and features in the list, and then whether or not it's allowed on the private and public interface. The available remote management features are Remote Assistance, Remote Desktop, Remote Event Log Management, Remote Event Monitor, Remote Scheduled Task Management, Remote Service Management, and Remote Shutdown, Remote Volume Management. Virtual Machine Monitoring, Windows Firewall Remote Management, Windows Management Instrumentation, Windows Remote Management, Windows Remote Management Compatibility. In addition to configuring the firewall, you also need to enable remote management on the Windows PC itself. You can do that through the Remote tab on the System Properties dialog. You can enable Remote Assistance and then specify on the Advanced button the detail of that, and you can enable Remote Desktop and choose which particular users are able to remote to this machine. Once you've enabled Remote Assistance, you can configure the following options. Allow the computer to be controlled remotely, and then specify how long an invitation can remain open. Generally, a user will invite an administrator to perform remote management. So you can specify how long that invitation will last for. The default is 6 hours. You can also specify what version of Windows can be used. So you can specify create invitations that can only be used from Windows Vista and later. So that's more secure. To use Remote Assistance, you can choose to either initiate solicited remote assistance, in which somebody asks for help, and you can see that option here on the dialog, invite someone you trust to help you, and then you will receive that invitation as an administrator, or unsolicited remote assistance, in which the administrator offers to help. Let's take a look at enabling remote assistance and then requesting remote assistance. So the first thing I'm going to do is enable remote assistance. I'm going to right click this PC and choose Properties and choose Remote Settings, and then I can just check the box Allow Remote Assistance Connections to this computer. That's enabled, as you can see already. Click Advanced and allow this computer to be remotely controlled or controlled remotely. I can also set the maximum amount of time invitations can remain open once I've asked someone to help me. It's 6 hours. The other place to look is in Windows Firewall. And we will just verify allow an app or feature through Windows Firewall and scroll down. And we should see remote assistance. As you can see, it's enabled, but only for private networks. So those are the things you need to check. So next, I want to invite someone to help. If I type remote assist, I can then choose invite someone to connect to your PC and help you. You can see there are two options. If someone sent me an invitation, I can now help someone who has invited you. Or if I'm requesting help, I choose invite someone you trust to help you. So let's go through that first. There are a number of different methods that I can use depending on how my computer is connected. I can save the invitation as a file to a file server somewhere, as long as the location I choose is accessible to the person I'm inviting to help. Or I can use email to send them the invitation. Obviously, I need their email address. Or I can use Easy Connect if that's also an option that's available for my helper. So I'm going to choose Save this invitation as a file. I'm going to specify it to a remote location, in this case on my friend's computer. And I'm going to choose to overwrite this existing file, Andrew's request. Click Save. And there's our Windows Remote Assistance window. I've got a password that I have to communicate to my friend, and that my friend will then enter the password that matches with the password here to establish a remote session. So let's take a look at that. So let's switch to the other computer. There we go. And if I open up a connection, the folder that contains the request, and click the request, it wants me to enter the password. So that's the password from the other computer. So let's type that in. Actually, I put it in the paste buffer to make life easier for myself. And click OK. It's now waiting on acceptance, as you can see here. So if I flick to the other machine, you can see that there's my invitation and there's my request to allow the remote person to connect. I'm going to say yes to that. And as it says here, your helper can now see your desktop. Let's just, hopefully this is not too confusing. Let's switch over to the other computer and you can see a Windows Remote Assistance window, and it's showing me the remote desktop within my own desktop. If I want, I can initiate a chat. And then I can type in text here. This gets a little confusing when you're chatting to yourself in two different windows. But nevertheless, so you can see how that would be useful if you're communicating with a remote user to say, could you just try this or could you just do that? But I can also request control. Now I've requested control, but in the other window on the other computer, it's telling me that the remote user wants to take remote control. So if I wanted to allow for that, I'd need to switch to the other computer. Here I am. And say, yes, that's okay. And now, if I go back to the helping computer, I've actually got the ability to control the desktop of the users. You can see the mouse as I move my mouse, so the other mouse session moves. So that's giving control to the helper. So remote assistance is quite a useful feature for helping solve a problem for a user, especially with the ability to take remote control. Sometimes it's much easier to show a user how to do something than it is perhaps to explain how to do it. In the demonstration, you saw how to enable remote assistance and how to request remote assistance. So it's also possible to configure remote assistance configuration using group policies. To do this, open up the appropriate group policy for editing and navigate to Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates, System Remote Assistance, and then you can configure the following options. Allow only Windows Vista or newer connections, turn on session logging, turn on bandwidth optimization, and configure solicited remote assistance, and configure offer remote assistance. The final piece of the remote management puzzle is the ability to use Management Console to manage remote computers. Here you can see a screenshot of computer management. If I want to perform the tasks listed here, task scheduler, event viewer, shared folders, local users and groups, performance, etc., all I need to do is to connect to another computer. Bear in mind that the remote computer must support remote administration through its firewall. We talked about that earlier in the session.